Well, good evening, everybody. I'm tired. I have a cold. My throat is all froggy. But I'm going to push through anyway. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And I'm a little bit insecure about it. Because it's a little unseemly, I guess. I guess I haven't quite broken free of the sticky tentacles of social control, and manufactured shame. Just a thought. I'm thinking that it's possible that that no matter how free you become, and I'm pretty free. I'm not, compared to a lot of people. Not everyone, but a lot of people. I'm pretty free, I don't really feel constrained by very many labels. But it's one of those things, whether it be conservative, liberal, believer, unbeliever, Christian, pagan. I don't really feel, I don't feel a undue loyalty really to any of those labels, educated, uneducated, trendy or not trendy, fashionable, not fashionable, unfashionable, conformist, rebel. I don't really feel, I feel like I sort of move pretty freely in and out of those labels depending upon, context and circumstance. Is that actually true? God only knows. But I feel that I'm pretty free amongst all of that. But it's like wealth, and it's like intelligence, and it's like strength, and it's like health. I think that the more you get, the more you realize you don't have. Right? It's not like you get $1 million and then you feel as if you have enough. Don't get me wrong, I've never had $1 million, but my imagination tells me that when you get $1 million, the only thing that you would learn from that experience is that $1 million is not that much money. It's certainly not as much as you thought it was, or maybe it's not what you think it was going to be. You thought it was going to bring all kinds of satisfaction and peace and happiness, and it didn't. Obviously, there's a acclimation period. I'm sure that for a short period of time, once you acquire health or beauty or power or wealth or strength, or that there's an acclimation period where it's probably very satisfying for a certain period of time, but then after a certain period of time, your normalcy bias is adjusted to the new normal, and the new normal doesn't have the same effect on you that it had when it wasn't normal, when it was extraordinary. When it's no longer extraordinary, then it's your new normal. So it doesn't have that same satisfaction, So I think it's the same thing with freedom, Same principle applies. Once you become free, then you realize, well, wait a minute. There's so much more freedom to be had, I think that might be where I am. So it seems a little bit unseemly what I want to talk about to me, and I would have to assume, due to the source of what I want to talk about, I would have to assume that it's just because of artificial social constraints But what I want to talk about are some of my favorite Bible verses or Bible passages. And I'm not going to be very specific because, number one, I'm driving. Number two, I don't have it all memorized very well. And number three, I think it's a little bit more respectful, I guess, to be a little bit vague and, allow people room for interpretation and cause for independent confirmation. All right? There's a certain offense, I think, that we should take to people that are too certain. Like they lay it down like this is the truth. I don't care if they're talking about religious truth or scientific truth or relational truth or nutrition truth or exercise truth or, no. I think that we should take a little bit of offense, more offense than we do, to people who are too certain, In their defense, I think that when they do act with extreme certainty, in their defense, I think that they're just giving people what they want. Because people want certainty. Because certainty relieves people of personal responsibility, It relieves people of their responsibility to do their own confirmation, Because, it's already settled. I don't have to go look into that. Well, no, actually you do. As a matter of fact, the more certain a person is, the more confirmation I think that we should do. Because certainty, theatrical, exaggerated certainty is part of a confidence game, right? Confidence game is when you act overly confident, and you're like selling your wares. You're selling your point of view with your confidence, with your manufactured, practiced, polished confidence, So I think that the more confident a person is, the more confirmation and independent research is called for. Because there's the greatest, the most confident people, that is to say, the people who come across with the most obvious confidence are often people who lack substance. They're just really skilled at putting on a confidence act. And as people have noted before, the confidence game is a con. That's why it's called the confidence. Confidence. It's a con, right? That's what the confidence game is. It's pretending to be confident, either A, when you're not, or B, when you know for a fact that what you're saying is true, and you're literally using confidence as a trick to trick people. Because naive people, lazy people, stupid people think that people who look confident are credible based upon the way they look, right? So there are people who are very sophisticated at the confident game, very skilled and very practiced and very excellent and very good at the confidence game. And when you start talking about multiple generations of people endowing that each respective generation with this skill and with this practice, then in fact it becomes like a malignant cancer, in that the people who are putting on the confidence cloak, right, don't know that they're putting on a confidence cloak, because the cloak was handed down to them from their birth, from their youngest formative years, and they actually believe that the game is the truth. They don't know how to make a distinction between the confidence game and the actual truth. So much so that they determine truth by who's best at putting on airs of confidence. That is their standard of truth. And there are literally people, and it does. I guess I would go a step further and say that it doesn't have to be multi-generational. It could just be formational. So a child that grows up in a home that is, has a extreme emphasis on all of the confidence, I don't know the right word, all the confidence routines, all the confidence, the institutions, where it's all about confidence. It's all about it's all about airs and letters and certifications and degrees and little, pats on the head and praise of other people and speeches and letters of commendation and various other forms of commendation. It's all about airs and airs and airs and airs and airs. AIRS. It's all about airs. It's just air. It's just hot air. It's just it's like a mutual admiration society of confidence game players. And they build each other up in the confidence game, and they convince each other that the confidence game is that there is no distinction between the confidence game and the truth. So it may not even be multi-generational. It's just formational. It's their formative. It's the formative fabric of their upbringing, of what defines them. Right. So my three favorite Bible verses are. No, I shouldn't say my three, but I'm thinking of three at the moment. This Psalm 50. At the end, it says that something to the effect of, whoever does not listen to me, I will rip them to pieces. That's God speaking. Then I'm thinking of Isaiah 26:18, where the prophet Isaiah is quoting, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jerusalem or Judah, and says, we were pregnant and we writhed in pain, and we gave birth to wind. I mean, think about that. We gave birth to wind. I mean, that's just wow. Of course, there's the proverbial Ezekiel 23, where God accuses the women of Israel of some extremely crude interest and uses extremely crude language to describe their interest. We would have to assume, I think, that the description, though crude, is nevertheless accurate. Right? I think we would have to make that assumption. And then, of course, there's a passage in the New Testament. This actually makes four. I wasn't going to include Ezekiel 23. I just threw that in there. Where Jesus, kicks over the tables and chases people with whips and calls people names. So the point of all this, for me, is to know my Heavenly Father as He actually is. Not as He is defined by the air, right, of our age. The hot air of all the false prophets. The lying snake tongues of all of the lying sages and prophets and scholars. I notice in the Bible, as I listen to Isaiah, but it's more than just Isaiah. It's in a lot of places. God talks often about putting the wisdom of the wise to shame, turning the wisdom of the wise upside down, making it all meaningless, wiping it all away, And as I learn more about God as He actually is, I can see how explicit that is needed, how explicit the need is, how explicit the discrepancy is between how God is presented to us and how actual scriptures present him. And this is another thing, a very profound, sort of shocking, I guess, reality about humankind. A friend of mine said to me one time, he's like, how could all these stuff about FEMA camps and all these crazy conspiracy theories, how could it all be true? The government can't keep anything secret, and I agree they can't. I mean, it's very difficult. I don't know. I could go back and forth on that. I mean, just because you learn about a secret, that doesn't mean they can't keep any secrets. Maybe you've learned about 1 out of 20, or 2 out of 20, and you think because you've learned about 2 that there are no more. Well, no, maybe they just, how are you supposed to know when they succeed? You don't. If you know, then they didn't succeed, right? So their success by definition is our unawareness, right? So we can't really talk about something we're unaware of. So I guess I can't even agree with him even on that level. But for the sake of argument, let's say that it's true. I think the most powerful way to keep a secret is to put the secret out in front of everybody's face and then tell them that it's not there. And then through various schemes, which I don't fully understand, but apparently they do exist and they are effective, through various schemes, convince them that something that's not right in front of them is not there, right? I mean, George Orwell, I think, talked about this, if not directly, indirectly, when he said, slavery is freedom, war is peace, love is hate, and that's what social engineers are skillful at. That is the mark of their trade, is to turn everything upside down and to say that what you see isn't real and what you don't see is, So that's what's happening with the Bible. You've got the Bible, it's right there in front of you. Anybody can read it. But the preachers get up and say it says something that it doesn't say, and we all believe it. Because, like I said in a previous video, power is a franchise. Leadership is a franchise. If the guy at the top is corrupt, he has the power to franchise his corruption down the line, like any franchise operation, like any multi-level marketing type of an operation. I mean, if the guy at the top is corrupt, or if he's good, it works both ways, obviously. But if the guy, for the sake of this conversation, if the guy at the top is corrupt, he can enforce that everybody fall in line behind his corruption by punishing anybody who doesn't fall in line, right? And when you punish, it's not that you have to punish everybody. You just have to punish a few, and then word gets around that, hey, this is the standard, And if you don't want to be punished, conform to the standard. And government is the ultimate hierarchical model of an organization, right? I mean, there's a guy at the top, and it's like a triangle, He tells everybody else what to do. Now we have a 3-pointed triangle, I guess, to be technical, but competing powers between the various branches, legislative, judicial, and executive branches of government. But I mean, to the degree that they cooperate with each other, then it's a single point, and they do cooperate to a certain degree. So we see in these Bible verses that God is not this effeminate, etiquette obsessed, just lisp speaking pansy who is concerned first and foremost with social standards, right? I mean, people that are first and foremost concerned with social standards or societal standards of sociability. They don't get up and say, "Hey, you listen to me, or I'll rip you to pieces." That's not a pandering, limp-wristed, lisp-speaking pansy that talks like that, right? That's not somebody who cowers at the judgment of what I like to call the Girdle and Bouffant Crowd, the moralizers, the church ladies, the people that have no physical strength, so they excel at the art as in an act of compensation. They excel at the art of psychological and social manipulation, right? So that's not how somebody who cowers at the judgment of that crowd acts, right? Somebody who cowers at the judgment of the Girdle and Bouffant Crowd, doesn't say, "Hey, you're so full of hot air that when you writhed in labor from being pregnant, you gave birth to wind." Right? I mean, that's not, again, same thing, right? That's not how somebody talks when in their heart and in their spirit they cower at the judgment of the Girdle and Bouffant Crowd, right? At the church ladies, at the judgment of the church ladies, at the word of the moralizers, at the word of the psychological and social manipulators, right? I mean, somebody who goes in to a place of worship among the elite, the quote-unquote pillars of the community, right? Somebody who goes into a place of worship and kicks over the table and calls people names and chases them around with a whip, right? That's not somebody who cowers at the judgment of the Girdle and Bouffant Crowd, at the judgmental eyes of the church ladies, right? At the word of the will of the psychological and the social manipulators, right? Now, I'm not trying to suggest that God is like a crude ruffian, I'm not trying to suggest that he's not somebody you could introduce to your mother or your grandmother, your sweet old grandma, or your sweet, endearing, loving, kind, gentle, nurturing mother. I'm not trying to suggest that. Like Max Lucado said about Donald Trump, very, very extraordinarily laughable, extraordinarily absurd, profoundly stupid observation in his little op-ed in the Washington Post. This pretentious little clown who makes such a big deal out of not ever talking about his political views. He goes and writes an op-ed to the Washington Post or whatever it was, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, whatever it was. I think it was Jeff Bezos' paper. I think it was the Washington Post. About his disdain for this politician or this aspiring politician because he didn't feel that he could. I mean, it's just too stupid. I don't even want to repeat it. It's just so absurd. I mean, it's beyond absurd, right? God is not that, right? But he's also not a man that cowers at the judgment of the Girdle and Bouffant Crowd, as evidenced by these 4 passages. I started out with 3, and they're not the only ones. There's I don't know if it's excellent or not. I found it to be very interesting. I can't confirm that it's true because I'm not smart enough. But there was an article in Relevant Magazine about the way that they have whitewashed scriptures and how the Apostle Paul, when he was talking about circumcision, he said he was so angry at the people who were insisting that everybody be circumcised, which of course were the Jewish people, and of course the Apostle Paul was the most Jewish person of all Jewish people of his day. because of his pedigree and his education and his station in life and his professional accomplishments. He said, I wish you people would just go ahead and go all the way. Meaning, while you're circumcising yourselves and your children, why don't you just go ahead and castrate yourselves and castrate your children so you won't reproduce and you'll just die off? That's a little bit of my own elaboration. Not the castration part, but the dying off part is my elaboration. I mean, we are made in the image of a God who knows how to use salty language when salty language is required to represent what is true, right? One of the games that these social engineers, whether they be professional or amateur, and there's plenty of both running around, one of the ways that these social engineers abuse the concept of morality, right, is that when people are describing other people's profane behavior, they cast aspersions on the person who's doing the describing on the basis that it's impolitic or it's impolite or it's not. So it's like, well, they're just describing what these other people are doing. Why are you attacking the person who is giving an accurate description of what these other people... They do this all the time with the homosexual issue. You're not allowed to talk about what the homosexuals do because if you do, you're being impolite. Well, it's like, I'm just accurately describing what they do. Or the transsexuals or the abortion doctors. It's impolite to accurately describe the disgusting, profane, injurious, disease-spreading things that other people do. And you're wrong for describing it, but they're okay if they want to do it. Right? It's a game. It's an abuse of the very concept of morality, of the actual idea of moral standards and moral goodness and goodwill for mankind. So, I just encourage everybody to continue to listen to your pastor, continue to go to church, continue to support your church, but just know that man or that woman up there who's talking to you may or may not be accurately described because, they're under a lot of pressure. Maybe one rich person is pulling their strings like they're some kind of a puppet, and maybe they don't have a choice, or maybe, obviously you always have a choice, but maybe they're in a tight spot. They don't feel like they have a choice. I'm just saying maybe. I'm not saying always, I'm just saying maybe. And the whole idea of one rich person, I mean, that's one of 1,000 possibilities. It's not the only possibility. I'm just saying, the most simplistic, the most extreme, that might be the most simplistic and the most extreme. But the thing of it is I believe that has actually occurred before, and you get an ambitious, professional that has possibly paying off a big giant mountain of school debt from his advanced degree or whatever, and and a family and a reputation, and all that stuff, and you got this, they got strings, they have strings that can be pulled, so they might be under a lot of pressure, and they may not be making the best decision in a perfect world, but they're making the best decision that they're capable of making, given the conditions that they're under. So, like I said, continue to support them, continue to listen, but just be wary, and is wary the right word? Yeah, I think wary is the right word. There's wary, weary, leery, and there's another one. They're very easy to confuse. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Those are some of my favorite Bible passages because they tell me things about my Heavenly Father that I'll never really ever hear anywhere, and those are the things that I'm most interested in knowing about my Heavenly Father, is the things that nobody wants to talk about, because those